"Can I take the leftovers for my mom? She hasn't eaten in 3 days." The diner fell silent for a second, then burst into laughter. A waitress begging for scraps, the biker sneered, tipping his plate onto the floor. "Guess your mom's used to food like that." The girl bent down to pick it up, and the chain around her neck slipped into view. Under the harsh light, the silver pendant caught a glare, a flame emblem identical to the tattoo inked on the biker's wrist. His grin froze. That symbol was carved on the necklace he'd given the woman, who pulled him from a burning wreck 11 years ago. His hand trembled, the glass slipped and shattered, because the waitress he had just mocked was the daughter of the woman who once saved his life. Nira Solon, all of 25, stood there in her faded apron hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail. No makeup, no flash. She didn't look like much to the folks in the diner, just another tired server scraping by in a greasy spoon off the highway. Her hands were steady as she swept the broken bits of plate into a dustpan, but her lips pressed tight, holding back something she wouldn't let spill. The biker Riven Core sat frozen, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned forward, eyes locked on that pendant. He didn't say a word, not yet, but the air around him shifted like a storm, rolling in slow. The other customers didn't notice. They were too busy chuckling, passing glances ready to pile on. Nira stood up, brushed her hands on her jeans, and walked back to the counter head high, like nothing had happened. The diner was packed that night, a mix of locals and out-of-towners, all buzzing with the kind of energy that comes from too much coffee and too little patience. Marla Dreen, the manager, strutted through the crowd, her heels clicking sharp on the linoleum. 40 bottle blonde with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes, she ruled the place like it was her personal kingdom. She caught Nira at the counter folding napkins. "You're begging for scraps now," Marla said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "This isn't a soup kitchen, sweetheart. You want to feed your mom, get a better job." The words landed like a slap, and a few customers snickered, egging her on. A teenage girl at a nearby table, dressed in a designer jacket too big for her frame, giggled and whispered to her friend, "She's probably stealing food for her whole family." Her friend, a lanky kid with braces and a smug grin, nodded, snapping a photo of Nira with his phone. "Gotta post this." "Diner drama starring the sad waitress," he said, tapping away at his screen. Nira kept folding napkins, her fingers moving, with the same steady rhythm, but her shoulders tensed just a fraction, like she could feel the camera's lens burning into her back. She didn't turn around, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction, but the air around her felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. Nira didn't flinch. She kept folding napkins, her fingers moving, steady, precise. But her eyes flicked up, just for a second, meeting Marla's. It was just a question, she said, voice soft but clear. The room didn't go quiet, but Marla's smirk faltered like she'd expected a bigger reaction. She huffed, turned on her heel, and barked at another server to wipe down tables. Nira went back to work, sliding a tray of coffee mugs to the next customer, her face calm, unreadable. Then came Cassian Reth, lounging at a corner booth. His silk tie loosened his Rolex, glinting under the fluorescent lights. 30, slick and smug, he was the kind of guy who tipped with a 20, just to make sure you knew he could. He leaned forward, grinning at his buddies, a couple of trust fund types in tailored jackets. "Hey waitress," he called, snapping his fingers. "You're selling those leftovers on the black market or what? Gotta make rent somehow. Right?" His friends laughed loud and mean, and one of them pulled out his phone, filming Nira as she walked over with a pot of coffee. She stopped at their table, filling his mug without a word. Her hand didn't shake, didn't spill a drop. But when Cassian leaned back smirking and said, "Bet your mom's real proud of you scraping plates for a living," Nira paused. She set the coffee pot down, slow, deliberate. "You done?" she asked, her voice low even. The table went quiet. Cassian blinked, caught off guard, then laughed it off, waving his hand like she was a fly he could swat away. Nira picked up the pot and walked back to the counter. Her steps measured her back straight. A man in a suit sitting alone at the counter piped up, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know, dear, there's programs for people like you," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Food banks, shelters. No need to beg in public." He smiled like he was doing her a favor, but his eyes were cold, scanning her worn sneakers, her plain shirt. Nira was wiping down the counter, her movements slow, deliberate. She stopped, looked at him, and said, "I wasn't begging. I was asking." Her voice was quiet, but it carried, and the man's smile froze. He cleared his throat, suddenly interested in his coffee, as Naira turned away, her rag moving in steady circles. Across the room, a woman in a red dress, mid-40s, with a pearl necklace and a laugh like broken glass, chimed in. "Oh, honey, you're adorable," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, like a little stray dog begging for scraps. "So cute." Her husband, a balding guy in a polo shirt, chuckled into his beer. Naira was clearing a table nearby, stacking plates. She didn't look up, but her hands slowed for a moment, just long enough to notice. The woman kept going louder now. "You should start a GoFundMe. Save the poor waitress." "I'd donate $1. More laughter rippled through the diner, sharp and cruel. At the far end of the diner, a group of college kids decked out in frat shirts and expensive sneakers started clapping, slow and mocking. "Give her an Oscar for effort," one of them shouted, a wiry guy with a backwards cap. "Best performance by a nobody." His friends howled, banging their fists on the table. Naira was carrying a tray of dirty dishes to the back, her steps even, but she stopped for a split second, her fingers tightening on the tray. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge them, but the pendant at her neck swung, slightly catching the light. Riven, still watching from his table, leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, like he was piecing something together. Naira slid the plates into a bus tub, her face still calm, but her fingers curled tight around the edge of the tub. She glanced at the woman, just a quick look, and said, "Thanks for the tip." Her voice was steady, almost polite, but it cut through the noise like a knife. The woman's laugh choked off, and her husband coughed into his glass. Naira turned away, carrying the tub to the back, her steps as even as ever. Riven, still at his table, watched her go. His jaw tight, his hand resting on the silver pendant he'd pulled from his pocket, identical to the one around her neck. The diner kept buzzing, but something felt off now, like the air was heavier. Marla was back at it, leaning over the counter, snapping at Naira as she refilled sugar jars. "You're slowing down the whole place," Marla said, her voice sharp enough to carry. "If you can't keep up, maybe you don't belong here." She grabbed a bag of trash from behind the counter and shoved it at Naira. "Take this out, and don't come back whining about your mom." Naira took the bag, her face blank, but as she turned, the bag caught on the counter's edge and tore. Stale bread and coffee grounds spilled across the floor. Marla laughed harsh and loud. "Look at that. Even the trash knows you're a mess." A woman in a glittery top, sitting with a group of friends, leaned over to get a better look. "Oh, that's sad," she said, her voice loud, performative. "She's practically living in the dumpster already." Her friends giggled, one of them snapping a photo of the spilled trash. Naira knelt to clean it, her hands quick but careful, scooping the debris into a new bag. She didn't look up, but her jaw tightened just enough to notice. Riven's eyes followed her, his fingers drumming slowly on the table like he was counting the seconds until something snapped. A guy at the counter, some trucker with a stained cap and a smirk, piped up. "Bet she's used to digging through garbage." "Right, hon." He winked at his buddy, who snorted into his fries. Naira stood tying the new bag shut, her movements precise. She didn't say a word, didn't look at them. But as she walked to the back, she passed a small mirror on the wall, and for a moment her reflection showed her hand brushing the pendant, her lips moving silently like she was whispering something to herself. Riven caught it, his hand stilling on the table, his face unreadable but his eyes sharp focused. Outside, Naira stood by the dumpster, the night air cool against her skin. She set the trash bag down, her hands lingering on the knot she'd tied. A faint sound caught her attention, a low rumble far off, but growing louder. She looked up, her eyes scanning the dark road beyond the parking lot. A single headlight flickered in the distance, then another, then more, until the horizon glowed with them. She didn't move, just watched her hand resting on the pendant. Back inside, Riven stood slow and walked to the counter, dropping a crumpled bill for his coffee. "Keep the change," he said, his voice low, rough like gravel under boots. Then he asked quieter, "That pendant, where'd you get it?" Naira looked at him, her eyes steady, searching his face. "My mom's," she said. "She found it after a crash years ago. Kept it for luck." Riven's breath caught just for a second, but he nodded, stepping back. He didn't say anything else, just turned and walked out the door, swinging shut behind him. The diner didn't notice, too caught up in their own noise, but Naira watched him go, her hand brushing the pendant at her neck, before she turned back to the counter. As Naira returned to the counter, a middle-aged woman with a loud floral scarf waved her over, her voice syrupy but sharp. "Sweetie, you dropped something," she said. pointing to a crumpled napkin on the floor. Naira bent to pick it up, but the woman kept talking, her tone mocking. "You really ought to be more careful. People might think you're not cut out for this." Her friends, all in similar bright scarves, nodded, their smiles tight and fake. Naira straightened, tucking the napkin into her apron, her face calm. "I'll manage," she said, her voice even, and turned to refill a coffee pot. The woman's smile faltered like she'd been cheated out of a bigger reaction. Outside, the night was cool, the parking lot lit by flickering neon. Riven stood by his bike, a black Harley that looked like it had seen 1,000 miles. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Call the crew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get here, now." He hung up, his eyes fixed on the diner's glowing windows, on Naira, moving between tables, her head down, but her shoulders square. He tucked the pendant back in his pocket, his face hard, like he was bracing for something big. Inside, the mood was turning uglier. Cassian was back at it louder, now his phone still out filming, as Naira cleared another table. "Look at her go," he said, his voice slurred from one too many beers. "Bet she's got a whole stash of leftovers in the back. Probably feeds the whole trailer park." His buddies laughed, and one of them tossed a fry at Naira's feet, watching to see if she'd pick it up. She didn't. She stepped over it, carrying a stack of plates, her face calm, but her eyes sharp, like she was counting every word, every move. A young couple at a nearby booth joined in, the guy leaning forward with a smirk. "Hey, you ever think about getting a real job?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry. His girlfriend, twirling a straw in her soda, giggled. "Yeah, like maybe try retail. At least you wouldn't smell like grease all day." Naira was wiping down a table, her rag moving in slow, steady strokes. She didn't look up, but her hand paused just for a moment before she kept going. The couple exchanged a look, pleased with themselves, and went back to their fries. Marla swooped in, her face twisted with disgust. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed, snatching a rag from Naira's hand and throwing it at her. "Clean up that mess and don't make a scene. You're lucky I don't fire you right now." The rag hit Naira's shoulder, falling to the floor. She bent to pick it up, her movements slow, deliberate. The room was watching now, the laughter quieter, but the tension thicker. Naira straightened, folding the rag in her hands. "I'm doing my job," she said, her voice low, steady. Marla opened her mouth to snap back, but something in Naira's look stopped her just for a second. Then the door swung open hard, banging against the wall. Riven was back, his boots heavy on the floor. The diner went quiet, all eyes on him. Marla's face soured. "I told you we don't serve your kind here," she said, crossing her arms. "Get out before I call the cops." Cassian, still filming, laughed. "Yeah, biker boy, take your trash and go. Maybe grab some of her leftovers on the way out." He tipped his coffee cup, letting a stream of it splash across Riven's boots. The room held its breath, waiting for a fight. An older man in a corner booth, his suit wrinkled from a long day, spoke up, his voice calm but cutting. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," he said to Naira, shaking his head. "This place has standards. Act like you belong." Naira was refilling ketchup bottles, her hands steady, but she stopped capping the bottle with a soft click. She looked at him, her eyes clear, unwavering. "I know where I belong," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The man blinked his fork, pausing halfway to his mouth, and looked away, suddenly engrossed in his plate. Riven didn't move. He looked at Cassian, his eyes cold, unblinking. Then he turned to Naira, his voice low. "You okay?" She nodded just once, her hands still folded around the rag. Riven stepped closer to the counter, ignoring Marla's glare. "That pendant," he said again, softer. "Your mom? What's her name?" Naira hesitated, her fingers brushing the silver flame. "Leora," she said. "Leora Solon." Riven's face changed just for a moment, like something heavy had settled in his chest. He nodded, then turned and walked out again, leaving the diner buzzing with whispers. A waitress in the back, younger than Naira, with nervous eyes and a shaky voice, approached her quietly. "Why do you let them talk to you like that?" she whispered, glancing at Marla. "You could fight back." Naira was stacking clean glasses, her movements slow, deliberate. She looked at the girl, her face softening for a moment. "Fighting's loud," she said. "I don't need loud." The younger waitress frowned, confused, but Naira just turned back to the glasses, her hands steady like she was holding on to something bigger than the moment. 15 minutes later, the ground shook with the rumble of engines. Dozens of motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the dark. The customers crowded the windows, their phones out. filming the line of bikes that stretched down the street. Marla's face went pale, her hands gripping the counter. "What the hell is this?" she muttered, but her voice shook. Naira stood behind the counter, wiping it down, her movements steady, but her eyes flicked to the windows, watching the bikes pull in, tight organized like a wall closing in. One of the bikers, a burly guy with a gray beard and a leather vest, walked in carrying a basket wrapped in cellophane. He set it on the counter in front of Naira, his voice gruff but kind. "From the boss," he said, "for the one with the silver flame." Naira froze, her hand hovering over the basket. She pulled back the wrapping, revealing stacks of canned goods, fresh fruit, and a small box of medical supplies, vials of medicine, syringes, a blood pressure monitor. Tucked inside was a card handwritten for Leora Solon. Naira's breath hitched, but she didn't cry. She just nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the card. A kid no older than 10, sitting with his mom at a nearby table, tugged at her sleeve. "Why is everyone being mean to her?" he asked loud enough for the room to hear. His mom, flustered, tried to shush him, but the boy kept going. "She's nice. She gave me extra ketchup." The room shifted, a few customers glancing away, their laughter fading. Naira looked at the kid, her lips curving just slightly, not quite a smile. She slid a small pack of crayons across the counter to him, her hand steady. "Thanks, kid," she said, her voice soft. The boy grinned, oblivious to the tension, and started drawing on his placemat. The diner was dead quiet now, the laughter gone. Cassian, still at his booth, sneered and pulled out his phone again. "What's this, some kind of biker charity scam?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You hooking up with criminals now? Waitress bet you're planning to extort us next." His buddies chuckled, but it was weak or nervous. Marla stepped forward, her face red. "That's it," she said. "You're fired, Naira. And I'm calling the cops. You and your biker." Returning to the counter, Naira started sorting receipts, her hands steady, but her fingers brushing the edge of the basket like it was grounding her. A woman at a nearby table, her purse clutched tight, leaned over and whispered loudly to her friend. "She's probably in on it with those bikers. Bet they're running drugs through here." Her friend nodded, eyes wide, and pulled out her phone to text someone. Naira's hands paused just for a second before she kept sorting, her face blank, but her shoulders stiffening like she was bracing for the next hit. The door opened again, and Rec Arden walked in his police uniform, crisp, his badge gleaming. 45 stocky, with a smug grin, he was the kind of cop who liked the power more than the job. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Naira. "Naira Solon," he said, his voice loud, official. "You're coming with me." He pulled out a pair of cuffs, the metal glinting under the lights. The customers started whispering, some pulling out their phones again, filming as Rec snapped the cuffs on Naira's wrists. "Let's go," he said, pulling her toward the door. The room erupted in cheers like they'd just won something. As Rec led Naira toward the exit, a busboy barely 18 dropped a tray of glasses, the crash echoing through the diner. He froze, his eyes wide, watching Naira. "She didn't do anything," he said, his voice cracking loud enough for a few heads to turn. Marla spun on him, her face furious. "Clean that up and keep your mouth shut," she snapped. The busboy knelt, picking up shards, but his hands shook and he kept glancing at Naira like he wanted to say more. Naira met his eyes, giving him a small nod, her face calm, and he went back to cleaning his shoulders, hunched. Naira didn't fight. She walked with him, her head high, her face blank. But as they passed the counter, a small box fell from her apron pocket, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Riven, who'd been standing near the door, knelt to pick it up. He opened it, his hand steady but slow. Inside was a folded note, the paper worn, creased from years of being carried. He unfolded it, and his eyes widened. Scrawled in faint ink were the words, "Thank you for living to save another." It was the same handwriting he'd seen on a scrap of paper pinned to his jacket after the crash 11 years ago, when a woman dragged him from a burning car. A customer, a heavy-set man with a loud tie, stood up, pointing at Naira. "She's probably got a rap sheet a mile long," he said, his voice booming. "You don't get gifts like that from bikers unless you're one of them." The room murmured, heads nodding, phones still filming. Naira's steps didn't falter, but her fingers curled slightly, the cuffs digging into her wrists. She didn't look at the man, didn't respond, but her chin lifted just a fraction as she walked past. Riven's eyes followed her, his grip tightening on the note, his face hard like he was holding back a storm. Riven stood, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stop!" he said loud enough to make the room freeze. She's the daughter of the woman who saved my life. Rek paused, the cuffs still on Naira's wrists, his face uncertain. Riven stepped forward, holding up the note. Leora Solin. She gave me her blood, her time, her everything. Nira's her kid. He turned to the biker at the counter who was already pulling out a folder. Inside was a hospital record, yellowed but clear. Donor Leora Solin. Recipient Riven Kaur. Date March 12, 2014. The diner went silent, the phones lowering, the cheers dying out. In the corner, an elderly woman, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea, spoke up, her voice soft but clear. I knew Leora. She set her eyes on Nira. She worked double shifts to pay for her daughter's school. Never complained. The room turned to her, surprised, but she kept going, her voice stronger now. She'd be proud of you, Naira. Don't let these fools tell you different. Naira's eyes met hers, and for a moment her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but she just nodded, her hands still cuffed, her face steady. Cassian was the first to speak, his voice shaky but defiant. So, what, I was just messing around. She's still a nobody. He laughed, but it was hollow, and his buddies didn't join in. Marla backed away, her hands twisting together. I didn't know, she said, her voice small. I was just following policy. Rek fumbled with the cuffs, his face red as he unlocked them, muttering, must have been a mix-up. The customers started slipping out, avoiding Naira's eyes, leaving their plates half-eaten. Naira stood there, rubbing her wrists, her face still calm, but her eyes were wet, shining under the lights. A biker outside, leaning against his bike, lit a cigarette and called out to the crowd still filming. "Y'all got your show," he said, his voice rough. "Now, how about you leave her be?" The customers hesitated, some lowering their phones, others shuffling toward their cars. Naira stood by the counter, her hands resting on the basket, her fingers brushing the card inside. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the biker, but her shoulders relaxed just a fraction, like a weight was starting to lift. Riven watched her, his face unreadable, his hand still clutching the note. Riven stepped in front of her, his broad shoulders blocking the room's view. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his presence like a shield. The biker with the gray beard came back carrying a heavy duffel bag. He set it on the counter, unzipping it to reveal a portable dialysis machine, sleek and new, with a stack of cash banded together beside it. For Leora, he said. Boss says it's enough to cover her treatment for life. Naira's hand went to her mouth, but she didn't make a sound. She just nodded, her fingers trembling as she touched the machine's smooth surface. The diner was empty now, except for a few stragglers who didn't know where to look. Riven spoke, his voice low, steady. Your mom saved me, he said to Naira. Now it's my turn. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, dropping them on the counter. This place is yours. I bought it this morning. The words hung in the air, heavy, real. Marla gasped, her hand flying to her chest, but she didn't say a word. A woman in the corner, one of the few still there, wiped her eyes, her coffee forgotten. A delivery guy who'd been sitting quietly at the counter stood up, his cap pulled low. I saw Leora once, he said, his voice rough from years on the road. She gave me a sandwich when I couldn't pay. Said it was on the house. He looked at Naira, his eyes soft. You're her kid, all right. Naira's hand stilled on the keys, her eyes flicking to him, then back to the counter. She didn't speak, but her lips pressed together like she was holding on to his words, tucking them away somewhere safe. Cassian stood, his face twisted with anger. You think you can just buy your way out of being trash? He shouted, grabbing a glass from his table. He raised it like he was going to throw it, but Riven caught his wrist, his grip steady, unyielding. The glass fell shattering on the floor. Naira stepped forward, her voice calm, clear. Nobody needs to change their fate, she said. Just how you see it. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room. The bikers moved in, grabbing Cassian by the collar, dragging him out, as he sputtered his Rolex, catching the light one last time. As the bikers pulled Cassian out, a woman who'd been silent all night, her hair gray and her hands folded tightly, stood up. I recorded everything she said, holding up her phone. Every word you said to her. She looked at Cassian's retreating figure, then at Marla, her voice steady. It's already online. The room froze, Marla's face draining of color. Naira didn't react, just picked up a rag and started wiping the counter again, her movements slow, like she was reclaiming the space. The woman sat back down, her phone still in hand, a quiet defiance in her eyes. Rex slipped out the back, his badge tucked under his jacket, his face pale. The bikers stayed their engines idling outside, a low growl that filled the silence. Neera stood behind the counter, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes fixed on the basket of supplies. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just breathed slow and steady, like she was holding the weight of the world and finally setting it down. The diner felt different now, quieter, like it was waiting for something new. A week later, the news hit. Reth Holdings Cassian's family empire was done sunk by a tax fraud scandal. Someone had sent an anonymous tip, a stack of documents traced back to a diner called Solon's. The story spread online, clips of Cassian's outburst going viral, his sponsors dropping him overnight. Marla was let go, her name tied to the scandal, her reputation in ashes. Rex's badge was under review, his old bribes catching up to him. The diner, now called Silver Flame, had a new sign, out front simple, but bold. Every night bikers rolled in, serving free meals to anyone who needed them, their bikes lined up like a promise. Neera walked past the sign one evening, her apron gone, her hair loose around her shoulders. She carried a small box, the one with her mom's note tucked close to her chest. Riven met her at the door holding a folder. "Legal adoption papers," he said, his voice soft. "Leora's got a family now. All of us." Neera looked at him, her eyes bright, and for the first time she smiled, small but real. The diner hummed behind them, filled with voices, laughter, the clink of plates. A man at a table nearby leaned over, whispering to his wife. She turned leftovers into a legacy. "You've been through it, haven't you? The looks, the words, the moments that cut deep. You stood tall anyway. You weren't wrong to keep going. You were never alone. Where are you watching from?" Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.